keep 7 to 8% body fat consistently over 15 years, despite exercising only once every 2 weeks per muscle group, against the general recommendation.
How is it even possible that almost everyone you know, even the healthiest of the healthiest, exercises wrong for longevity and health? New research reveals a shocking truth: more death with the wrong type of exercise. And top athletes are dying younger than their defeated rivals or even non-trained people. And bodybuilders gain absolutely no longevity benefits from their lifelong exercise. But why? Something is very wrong about our understanding on how exercise affects how many years we'll live on this planet.
Let's use 3 examples of decades of documented exercise and see what happens.
Let's start with Olympic athletes. These individuals spend most of their lives in better shape than the average person and have much better genetic tendencies towards fitness. How much longer do they live compared to the average untrained Joe? This study from 2020 tracked the mortality rate of German Olympic athletes from 1956 until 2016. What is unique about this study is, listen to this, they also track the association between success in the Olympics to longevity. What did they find? I'm quoting. Currently, the survival rate of German Olympians is lower compared to the general population. This is surprising. They live shorter life than the average person. Now, how has this Olympic success affected these athletes' longevity? What do you think happened? I'm quoting. On the contrary, it was found that the Olympic success represented a linear risk for survival probability. Linear risk means the more success, the higher the risk for mortality. And they also found that the more medals they won, the higher the risk. I'm quoting. Further significant risk factors are the total number of medals won. That doesn't sound like a huge win to me. The researchers summarized, in summary, the better the Olympic result, the higher the risk of mortality in this cohort. This raises questions. Why do Olympic athletes, on average, live shorter lives compared to the average person, if better fitness and more training are supposed to be the keys to longevity? And why do the most successful athletes, those who train the hardest, the winners, seem to die even sooner? Let's see another fascinating study on Olympic athletes.
This study from 2017 compared mortality rates between different types of Olympic athletes. The study is called Differences in Life Expectancy between Olympic high jumpers, discus throwers, marathon, and 100-meter runners. I would expect marathon runners to live the longest. Regardless of their exercise, they have the lowest body weight and the lowest body fat, both of which we know increase longevity. And based what we told about the best exercise for health, I would expect marathon runners to rank as number 1. Let's see what they found in the study. I'm quoting. We identified a death rate for 336 athletes, 229 males and 100 plus females. Now, you know who lived the longest? Let's see in the graph. As you can see in this graph, the high jumpers had a significantly lower mortality than the rest of the groups. I continue to quote from the study. Survival was the greatest for high jumpers, 7.1 years for women and 3.7 years for men, and marathon runners, 4.7 years for men. They did not check mortality for female marathon runners. But what is more interesting is that as we progress with time, actually the high jumpers defeated all the other groups in longevity, both men and women. What does it mean? It would seem that different exercises over a long period of time affect longevity differently. And if you want to live longer and stay healthier, you need to target longevity with your exercise.
Is this phenomenon unique to Olympic athletes? Now let's see what happens with bodybuilders.
Most bodybuilders not only exercise frequently for 30 years, but almost all of them continue to exercise frequently after they retire. Yet, they don't live longer at all. This study from 2016, conducted by Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, they identified 1,578 professional male bodybuilders who compete from 1948 to 2014. They found, I'm quoting, mortality rate higher among bodybuilders. Bodybuilders have a mortality rate 34% higher than of the age-matched US male population. Of course, you would say most of them are using anabolic steroids, and you would be right, and these steroids reduce the lifespan. However, you would expect that this frequent exercise over decades will do something for the longevity, maybe at least reaching the average lifespan of somebody who doesn't exercise at all. But it doesn't. Bodybuilders don't have any longevity benefits. So exercise doesn't translate automatically into longevity. It depends on what you do. Now, lastly, I want to present to you a very unscientific yet interesting case of lifelong documented exercise and the impact on longevity. I'm a European football fan, and every year the Football Association, they present the honor of the best player in the world. This is called the Ballon d'Or. And the first football player to receive this award is the English Stanley Matthews. It took place in 1953, and he received this award at the impressive age of 38. This is an age when 99% of players are already retired. How did he do that? Well, Stanley Matthews kept a very healthy lifestyle. He didn't do steroids and considered to be one of the fairest and honest players of his time. And Stanley Matthews maintained a vegetarian diet, a diet suggested by many longevity experts as a longevity diet. So I would expect his diet alone, without exercise, should bring him at least 5 to 10 years in extra longevity. But what we like about his case is that he had been taking part in professional sports for 40 years and after. He had a documented frequent exercise routine. In fact, he was the oldest player to ever play in England's top football division at age 50. He played until he was 50, and he continued to exercise afterwards, frequently. And lastly, what I really like about his story is that he died of old age, as opposed to an unfortunate weak heart or collapsing liver. So his genome pool seems fine. How long did he live? He died at the year 2000, at the age of 85, beating indeed the average. But Stanley Matthews beat the average by only 5 years. 5 years is cool, but with his diet and lifelong exercise routine, I would expect more. Because listen, his diet alone could give him 5 extra years of life. Where are the longevity benefits from his frequent lifelong exercise? Especially believing what I was told about exercise and longevity. So what does it mean? To me, it means that exercise doesn't translate automatically into longevity. Even if you exercise every day, and even if you follow the high frequency recommended by many experts. Now, don't get me wrong, exercise is a terrific tool for longevity, but we must know how to use it right.
Today, I will show you the exercise principle that enabled me to keep my muscles young, to keep my entire body young, and also save me tremendous amount of time, and you can do that too, today. For example, these are my original recent organ aging tests. As you can see, despite being 37, my muscles are almost a decade younger than my real age. If you were to compete in sports against me, in speed or strength, you can tell that I am younger than my real age. And also I preserved 4 years of my youth. All that despite exercising only once every 2 weeks per body part.
The next section will delve deeper into the mechanics of exercise and their application to decelerate aging and extend longevity.
In the Wellness Messiah podcast, we try to beat the race against time in aging, with hopefully minimal lifestyle sacrifices, because your happiness matters too.
Exercise is a form of physical, mechanical stress that we apply in our bodies. This type of physical stress can achieve different goals, from weight loss, bodybuilding, performance, and longevity. All of this depends on the type of mechanism that we try to target. And here, longevity is our primary goal. And the major longevity mechanism that exercise activates is autophagy. For that, we must understand what is autophagy. Autophagy means in Greek, self-eating, a process where cells use their own proteins to eat in order to survive without food. Let's hear now the world's leading expert on autophagy, Dr. Eileen White. That's going to give us a huge clue into how autophagy works and how it helps us to live longer.
What we didn't expect was the extraordinary propensity for survival. We could leave the cells out and put them in buffer. They wouldn't die under extraordinary circumstances that we couldn't explain. So why would a cell that just couldn't commit suicide survive in buffer with no nutrients at all? We puzzled over this, like, how can this be? And then we discovered that what these cells had done was turned on autophagy, and we're using that for survival, and that this was a mechanism by which yeast survived starvation.
So autophagy enables the cell to survive for a long time without food, especially without protein. It does so by recycling the protein within the cell. It's the cell superpower, but it needs to be activated. And the consequences of activating autophagy are excellent for our longevity. The next question is, how does this survival program actually help us to live longer? First, autophagy increases the life of the individual cells. That's good for us because when our cells live longer, so do we. And because of autophagy, we avoid the excess turnover of cells. You see, there are so many times each cell can replicate, meaning there is a longevity cost for every excessive turnover of cells. Autophagy helps us to avoid that. Another help for our longevity is that autophagy's consequences is recycling toxic proteins, and it prevents their accumulation. You see, we tend to think of protein as something that is good for us, a healthy building block, a nourishment. But protein inside our bodies can form toxic compounds inside the cells and accumulate and cause damage. It's basically junk, and we call it protein aggregates. These toxins are a major cause of aging, and they lead to many diseases when they accumulate. These toxic proteins are especially dangerous for the brain and the nervous system. Without recycling these toxic protein aggregates, our brains deteriorate. Let's hear Dr. Eileen White again explains what happens to the brain and the nervous system when you turn off autophagy in mice.
We engineered mice where we can take an adult mouse and give the mice a chemical so that an essential autophagy gene will be deleted throughout the entire animal. So one day they're an adult mouse with autophagy, and then a few days later they're an adult mouse with no autophagy. And these mice were very extraordinary. They lived for 2 to 3 months, and then they died predominantly of neurodegeneration. Autophagy is very important in the brain over the long term. One other way of looking at it is what tissues are more autophagy dependent than others. Brain would be really important, and there are a few others. And what we noticed when we looked at the mouse that lacked autophagy was that there were tissues like the brain that were very sensitive, and there were other tissues like the lungs that didn't have any phenotype.
So what does it mean? It means that if you care about preventing mental decline with age, you need autophagy. It also means that if you want to prevent Alzheimer's disease, you want to activate autophagy. In fact, preventing Alzheimer's also is going to help you live longer because Alzheimer's is one of the 4 biggest killers in our society. And the third beneficial consequence for your longevity from autophagy is that autophagy helps us to live longer by reducing damage to the cell. We're going to cover this later, but damage accumulation causes aging. And these toxic proteins, if they hang in the cell, they lead to damage, including DNA damage, which can lead to cancer later. This is not good for your longevity. So autophagy helps us to prevent this damage from happening in the first place. And all these 3 consequences of autophagy are good for your longevity. And indeed, we know that studies of autophagy, when it's activated in animals, it increases their lifespan. Now, the big question, how do we activate autophagy? There are 2 major tools, exercise and fasting. And today we're going to focus on exercise. Exercise activates autophagy. But knowing that doesn't tell us the secret on how to use exercise for longevity. For that, we need to ask the question, how does exercise exactly activate autophagy? Because if we know that, then we can target this autophagy mechanism with our exercise routine. There are 2 ways by which exercise activates autophagy. The first one is called hypoxia. This term is very important today, so please try to remember that and understand what it means. Hypoxia comes from hypo, which means low, less, and oxygen, combination of low oxygen. And hypoxia really means low oxygen levels inside the cell. In hypoxia, this oxygen deficiency is probably the most potent way to stimulate autophagy. Nothing seems to come close. Now, why does hypoxia, low levels of oxygen, stimulate autophagy? For that, we need to understand what does low oxygen levels inside the cell mean to the DNA, mean to the cell. Let me quote from this study from 2010. It's called Protein Metabolism and Microenvironmental Stress. I'm quoting. Nutrients are more severely depleted than oxygen because oxygen can diffuse through tissue with greater efficiency than nutrients. Thus, it can be assumed that all the circulating nutrients, For example, glucose, glutamine, fatty acids, and circulating amino acids would be at low supply. So what does it mean? It means that hypoxia, low levels of oxygen within the cell, not only tells the cell that there is not enough oxygen to produce energy, but it also tells the cell that all other nutrients are low. In essence, the cells are using low levels of oxygen to sense the entire environment and sense nutrient deprivation. This is why hypoxia is such a potent inducer for autophagy, a protein recycling and survival mechanism under a nutrient deprivation environment. How can we create this oxygen deficiency in order to activate autophagy with our exercise? Simple, but exercising intensely. When you perform an intense exercise, oxygen levels within the cell plummet. When you think about sprinting and struggling to breathe, it means that your lungs are struggling to provide enough oxygen. This request or demand for oxygen from the lungs is actually coming from the cells directly. And when your heartbeat goes up, this too suggests hypoxia. As the heart struggles to provide enough blood and oxygen to the cell, this is hypoxia. In addition, of course, to the request of the cells to remove CO2 from the blood as well. In contrast, when you do a leisurely walk and have a low heart rate and breathe easily, this suggests no hypoxia at all. So it means that by observing your breathing and heart rate during your exercise, you can estimate hypoxia within the targeted cells. And the more intense the exercise is, the lower oxygen levels will reach. And this means more activation of autophagy. This is great for longevity. What is intensity? In terms of exercise, intensity is the actual stress that you expose your muscles, your heart, and lungs to. And this is truly what creates hypoxia and muscle damage. Exercise intensity is controlled by three parameters: speed, resistance, and time under stress. For example, if you run, you're training your leg muscles, your heart, and lungs. If you increase your speed, you increase your intensity on those organs. However, if you run at the same pace for more time than usual, to the point that your body struggles, basically you increase your intensity by increasing time under stress without changing your speed. And thirdly, if you run and now you carry a heavy bag on your back, this increases the resistance against the power of gravity. So this increasing your intensity without actually increasing speed or time under stress. So you can apply these three principles to any exercise that you're doing right now to increase the intensity. And indeed, a study of nearly 500,000 people suggests that intense exercise leads to the greatest longevity benefits and reduced mortality. Let's hear now Dr. James O'Keefe, our cardiologist, speaks about this study.
Okay, and this is a study of over 400,000 Chinese that was just published within the last year. They found that vigorous exercise, this is all-cause mortality reduction. The more reduction, the better. And this is minutes of daily exercise. So 10, 20, 30 minutes of daily exercise up. At 40, it starts plateauing. At 45 or 50, you get a point for further plateaus. So further efforts and time do not appear to convey further improvements in life expectancy. Down here is moderate exercise, light to moderate exercise, walking, housework, day-to-day, moving around. Just get off your seat, move around. More is better there. It's not quite as beneficial as vigorous exercise, but more is better. You can exercise all day.
The study that Dr. James O'Keefe mentioned is from 2011. It is called Minimum Amount of Physical Activity for Reduced Mortality and Extended Life Expectancy, a prospective cohort study. In terms of exercise, intensity means speed, resistance, and time under stress. So we want intense exercise to create hypoxia. But that's not everything. Dr. David Sinclair suggested that alternating oxygen levels is the best longevity strategy. Let's hear him speaking about that.
But one of the theories is that it's working similar to exercise. So hypoxia, the low oxygen when you go for a run, what it's doing is turning on this HIF-1 alpha protein that I talked about earlier, and that helps promote health in the body. Hyperbaric chamber treatment does the very similar thing. You get a production of these free radicals, and that stimulates also a mitohormesis response that gives you very similar benefits to low oxygen. There's one theory that I have is that when you come down from the high levels of oxygen, it simulates hypoxia, like you're running as you come down from high levels to low levels. The differential, and that fits with the new findings, which is going up once and coming down once is not as good as going up and down within a treatment.
So what's the meaning of what Dr. David Sinclair said to our exercise routine? It means that if what he said is true, then intense exercise in intervals, meaning HIIT, high-intensity interval training, is actually better for longevity than just intense exercise if you want to induce autophagy. Now, I searched for a study that would compare intense exercise versus interval intense training, but I could not find one. The one thing that we are sure about is that intense exercise activates autophagy, which increases longevity. How can you apply that type of training? You can do sprinting in short bouts, you can do high-intensity training in a bicycle, and you can use the elliptical machine. In those cases, you're going to cycle oxygen up and down during the exercise, and you apply high-intensity training, which activates the longevity pathways. So hypoxia is one way in which exercise activates autophagy. The second way that exercise does so is by creating cellular damage, or muscle damage if you will. Let's hear from Dr. Eileen White again about how exercise stimulates autophagy, and she also touches hypoxia as well, which is good for us.
In terms of exercise, that's very well studied, that exercise induces autophagy very potently, and you actually need autophagy because exercise damages the muscle, and autophagy is one of the processes that helps mitigate the damage that occurs during exercise.
What about hypoxia?
Oh, potently. Hypoxia potently induces autophagy.
So muscle damage from exercise stimulates autophagy. What type of exercise creates this muscle damage? High-intensity training. Again, this is another hint that the intensity of our exercise can help us to increase our longevity. Now, this is important. Damage indeed induces autophagy, and autophagy is excellent for our longevity. But what impact does this damage have on our longevity? Is this damage an absolute good? Let's put a clip from Dr. Paul Robbins in an interview by Richard from Modern Health Span.
What is it mechanistically you think that is going wrong that drives aging?
Well, obviously, aging is a normal process. It happens to everyone and every organism, and it's kind of required by evolution. You can't live forever. So the way I view aging is that it's accumulation of damage that is caused by a variety of exogenous, so external and internal processes. And one of those processes, which we focus on because we think it is one of the key drivers, is actually damage to the genome.
Like, I guess a set amount of damage that we can have, and lifespan is scaled by how well you repair it.
Right. What we think is actually the damage that, when repaired, could lead to mutations. That's more the driving force behind aging.
Dr. Paul Robbins presented one theory, and not the only theory, of why we age, which is the damage theory. Now, according to this damage theory, we receive a young, mature body. Let's say at the age of 20. We receive this body just like a new mobile phone that we have just received from Amazon. This new body operates smoothly in the most efficient way. However, living has a price, and our body is exposed to everyday damage from being alive. And over time, this damage is being accumulated, just like with cracks and scratches on our mobile phones. Luckily, and unlike our mobile phones, our bodies can repair and do repair this damage. We have a repair mechanisms, and this repair prevents us from aging quickly. However, this repair process is not perfect. Over time, there is a gap between the creation of damage to the repair of this damage. And this gap between damage and repair is aging. Aging is the accumulation of damage on our bodies from living. And so to preserve our youthfulness, we need to do two things. We need to reduce damage and accelerate repair. However, the story is more complex than that. We have seen with exercise and autophagy that this very damage does have a role. Damage itself, many times, and in the right way, is responsible for activating those very repair mechanisms. This is exactly what we have seen with exercise that causes damage that activates autophagy. So here we have a conundrum. How can we increase repair rate without creating unnecessary damage? We spoke about how intensity activates autophagy and how we need to use high-intensity training, possibly interval training, but infrequently. We also explained the damage theory of aging and the fact that we want to reduce damage and increase repair rate. So far, so good. The problem is with over-exercising. When we over-exercise, we hurt the ability of our repair system to do its job. Instead of activating autophagy, it could lead to the death of muscle cells. This death is called apoptosis. Muscle cells, can either survive by activating autophagy or die as a response to excess stress. Cells cannot do both. They have to choose. This is the tiebreaker system that we explain in the resveratrol series videos. Now let's read from this paper from 2015, Exercise, Autophagy, and Apoptosis. Exercise is a form of physiological stress which is known to induce adaptational response. In other words, what they're saying is the benefits from exercise to our longevity comes from the adaptation to exercise. This is the activation of the repair system that we mentioned before. And what we also understand from that is we gain the benefits from exercise after the exercise, not during the exercise, like when you try to lose weight. I'm continuing to quote. It is proposed that both apoptosis and autophagy are processes which are necessary for adaptation to exercise. Apoptosis and autophagy are induced during exercise to limit tissue damage, restore tissue integrity, terminate inflammatory response, or induce direct signals for adaptation. In this case, the cell is flooded with damaged molecules, the repairing mechanisms are overtaxed, and apoptosis is induced. What does apoptosis that is induced mean? Cell death. This means that if the muscle cells, cannot repair the damage caused by exercise, it leads to the death of the muscle cell. And this can lead to muscle wasting. This outcome is the actual opposite of autophagy, which is about survival, not death. And it's not good for longevity. Unless, of course, it happens to cells that you don't want to stay in your body. And in terms of exercise and muscle cells, too much stress means that the cell cannot repair the damage of the exercise. As they said in the study, the repair mechanisms are overtaxed. I really like this word here.
To overtax, to make excessive demands on the physical capabilities of our bodies.
And this is exactly what happens when you overtrain and you don't provide enough time and condition for recovery from this high-intensity training. The question is this: how can we exercise in a way that stimulates longevity activation without the creation of unnecessary, undue damage?
In part 2, we will discover the 5 keys to exercise for longevity. As you have seen in this video, there is a massive confusion in the exercise for longevity field.